In the fateful year of 1789, the Kingdom of France was collapsing under the weight of an unprecedented financial crisis. Decades of expensive foreign wars, lavish royal extravagance, and a highly regressive tax system had pushed the French monarchy to the absolute brink of total insolvency. The newly formed National Constituent Assembly inherited a nation with completely empty vaults and a mountain of interest payments on the massive national debt. To prevent a catastrophic default that would destroy the young revolution before it could start, the Assembly desperately needed a massive source of capital. It was during this period of extreme fiscal panic that a prominent and influential bishop named Charles Maurice de Talleyrand proposed a radical solution to the lawmakers. Talleyrand argued that the vast land holdings of the Catholic Church in France, which amounted to nearly one-fifth of the entire country, should be confiscated and placed at the disposal of the nation. The Assembly agreed and declared that all ecclesiastical property, valued at roughly 3 billion livres, was now public property. However, selling off such an immense amount of real estate all at once was practically impossible, as it would crash the property market and take decades to complete. To solve this immediate liquidity problem, the government decided to issue a new type of financial security called an assignat. The assignats were originally designed as short-term treasury bonds that paid a generous interest rate of about 5% to investors. Buyers could use these bonds to purchase the confiscated church lands, which were officially designated as national assets. Once the land was sold and the assignats were returned to the treasury, the paper certificates were supposed to be burned. This plan was designed to absorb the state's short-term debts while gradually and safely selling off the confiscated property without causing inflation. The initial issue of 400 million livres of assignats in late 1789 was a major success for the Treasury. Investors eagerly bought the interest-bearing bonds, and the government managed to stabilize its finances and pay off its immediate creditors. But the revolutionary government was facing severe and growing budget deficits, and they could not wait for the slow process of land auctions. In 1790, the National Assembly took a fateful step that would completely change the nature of the assignats and the French economy. They officially removed the interest payments, converted the bonds into paper banknotes, and declared them to be legal tender for all transactions. This decision turned a temporary debt funding tool into a national paper currency backed only by the promise of future land sales. The famous politician and orator Honoré Mirabeau argued that the paper money would stimulate trade, create jobs, and revitalize the depressed French economy. Mirabeau believed that because the currency was backed by solid, tangible real estate, it could never suffer from the depreciation of ordinary fiat money. Encouraged by this optimistic view, the government printed another 800 million livres of paper notes to pay its bills. At first, the influx of paper money brought a brief wave of economic relief and commercial activity across the cities. But the temptation to solve all fiscal problems by simply printing more paper proved far too strong for the revolutionary politicians. Whenever the Treasury ran out of funds to pay soldiers, buy grain, or service debt, the Assembly authorized another round of printing. By 1792, the total amount of assignats in circulation had reached roughly 2.5 billion livres. As the supply of paper money expanded rapidly, the value of the assignats relative to gold and silver began to decline steadily. Merchants and foreign bankers realized that the printing of paper notes was far outpacing the actual value of the national lands. To make matters worse, France declared war on Austria and Prussia in 1792, which immediately created massive new military expenses for the state. The government had no choice but to accelerate the printing presses to fund the war effort, supply the armies, and feed the urban population. The situation deteriorated further when the radical Jacobins seized power and executed King Louis XVI in 1793. The execution of the king led to war with a coalition of European powers, pushing the French economy into total isolation. To fund the war on multiple fronts, the Jacobin government printed billions of additional livres in a matter of months. The value of the paper money collapsed, with the assignat losing over half of its original purchasing power by mid-1793. Shopkeepers and farmers began to reject the paper notes, demanding payment in silver and gold coins instead. This caused a severe shortage of food and basic goods in the cities, leading to widespread food riots and protests. In response to the crisis, the Jacobin leader Maximilien Robespierre introduced a series of extreme economic measures to force acceptance of the currency. The government passed the law of the maximum, which set strict price limits on grain, flour, oil, and other essential goods. Anyone who refused to accept the assignats at their face value was labeled an enemy of the revolution and arrested. The penalty for hoarding gold, silver, or food was death by the guillotine, creating an atmosphere of intense fear and suspicion. Revolutionary tribunals sent hundreds of merchants and farmers to the scaffold for trying to protect their wealth from the falling paper. Furthermore, the government began to confiscate the lands of the nobility who had fled the country, calling them émigré properties. These newly seized lands were added to the backing of the assignats, but this did nothing to restore public confidence in the paper money. While these draconian laws temporarily forced prices down, they ultimately destroyed the supply chains and worsened the shortages. Farmers hid their grain crops or fed them to livestock rather than selling them for what they considered worthless paper. A massive black market emerged where goods were traded secretly at high prices using hidden gold and silver coins. The paper assignat became a symbol of political oppression, accepted only because of the threat of state violence. Adding to the chaos, counterfeiters in Great Britain began flooding France with fake assignats. The British government, led by William Pitt, supported this counterfeiting campaign to destabilize the French economy. Millions of high-quality forged assignats were shipped across the Channel, further diluting the money supply and destroying its purchasing power. In late 1794, Robespierre was overthrown and executed, ending the reign of terror and the strict price controls. The new government, known as the Directory, abolished the law of the maximum and restored freedom of trade to the market. However, without price controls, the hidden inflation exploded into full-blown hyperinflation almost overnight. The Directory was corrupt, inefficient, and faced with the massive task of rebuilding a ruined nation and continuing the war. Lacking tax revenue, the new leaders resorted to the only tool they had left, printing more paper money. The printing presses ran day and night, producing millions of new paper notes that lost value as soon as they were issued. By 1796, the total face value of assignats in circulation had reached the astronomical sum of roughly 45 billion livres. A single assignat note was worth less than the cost of the paper and ink required to print it. In Paris, a simple cup of coffee or a loaf of bread cost thousands of paper livres, forcing people to carry bags of cash for minor purchases. Employees demanded to be paid daily or even hourly so they could spend their paper before it lost more value. The economy reverted to barter trade, with people exchanging shoes, clothes, and tools directly for flour and wood. Realizing that the assignat was completely dead, the Directory decided to replace it with a new paper currency in 1796. This new paper note was called the mandat territorial, and it was supposedly backed by specific tracts of national land. However, the public had lost all faith in government paper, and the mandats lost 90% of their value on their first day of trading. Speculators bought the mandats for pennies and used them to purchase valuable state-owned properties at massive discounts. This massive transfer of wealth created a new class of rich speculators while bankrupting the traditional middle class and the poor. Finally, in February 1796, the government admitted total defeat and ordered the destruction of the printing machinery. In a public ceremony in Paris, the printing plates, paper stocks, and presses used to make the assignats were broken and burned. The government declared all paper currencies null and void, effectively wiping out the remaining paper savings of the population. France was forced to return to a pure gold and silver monetary standard, which immediately stabilized prices but caused a severe credit crunch. When Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in 1799, he established a strict hard money policy for the French Empire. Napoleon founded the Banque de France and refused to issue any paper banknotes that were not fully backed by physical gold. He famously declared that he would rather halt government operations than issue paper currency to fund his military campaigns. This hard money policy restored financial stability and public trust, allowing France to fund its empire through taxes and foreign conquest. The assignat hyperinflation left a deep scar on the collective memory of the French nation, warning generations about paper money. It demonstrated that even when paper currency is backed by valuable physical assets like land, it will collapse if printed in excess. The value of money ultimately rests on trust, and once a government destroys that trust, no asset backing can save the currency. The psychological patterns of the French hyperinflation are identical to those observed in modern monetary crises. From Weimar Germany to modern inflation episodes, the story remains the same. Printing money to solve political problems leads to ruin. To protect your wealth in an era of global debt expansion, you must focus on assets with intrinsic value and limited supply. Always keep a portion of your portfolio in real-world productivity to survive the inevitable cycles of monetary inflation. Understanding the lessons of history is the best way to safeguard your financial future from the mistakes of the past. This analysis is for educational purposes only and does not constitute professional investment advice. If you found this financial analysis valuable, please subscribe to the channel for more monetary history. The story of the assignats is a reminder that no government can print its way to prosperity. During the height of the crisis, the purchasing power of the paper notes dropped so fast that it was described as a melting ice cube. Even the famous English writer Charles Dickens referenced the financial distress of this era in his classic historical novels. To make matters worse, the collapse of credit meant that the government could not borrow from domestic or foreign lenders. The only reason the Republic survived was because it plundered neighboring territories as its revolutionary armies advanced across Europe. This external plunder provided the physical gold and silver needed to keep the military functioning and pay for critical imports. But for the citizens inside France, the economic reality was one of constant struggle, starvation, and financial ruin. The middle class, who had saved their money in government bonds, saw their life savings completely erased by the hyperinflation. Meanwhile, a small group of politically connected insiders made massive fortunes by exploiting the wild fluctuations in the paper currency. They bought up vast estates, historic chateaux, and valuable works of art for a fraction of their actual worth. This wealth inequality fueled social anger and led to further political instability throughout the late 1790s. The lessons of the assignats are more relevant today than ever, as global central banks continue to expand the money supply. While modern fiat currencies are not backed by land, they rely on the same fragile foundation of public trust and political stability. When that trust begins to erode, the currency depreciates and the cost of living rises for ordinary families. Historically, the transition from paper money back to hard currency has always been a painful and difficult economic process. It requires deep structural reforms, fiscal discipline, and a willingness to accept short-term economic pain for long-term stability. Napoleon Bonaparte understood this clearly, which is why he maintained his strict gold standard despite the massive costs of his global wars. His financial reforms laid the foundation for the French economy to dominate continental Europe for more than a decade. By studying these historic events, We can learn to recognize the early warning signs of monetary debasement in our own times. We can make informed decisions about how to allocate our assets and protect our families from the loss of purchasing power. Whether it is real estate, precious metals, or shares in productive businesses, holding real assets is the key to surviving inflation. Do not let short-term speculative trends distract you from the proven principles of wealth preservation. Keep your investment portfolio grounded in value, utility, and historical perspective. Thank you for watching, and be sure to leave your thoughts on the French Revolution.